There's a lot to talk about,
Yeah.
and I'd like to start with the state of the Canadian economy.
Sure.
A few weeks ago, the Bank of Canada, as you know, cut its projections for growth, projected a full-out contraction in the first half of this year, and cut interest rates for the second time this year to lift the economy. Should Canadians be concerned about the economy, and is there anything the government can do about the slowdown?
Well, first of all, we should always be concerned about the economy. We remain, this is 6 years on now after the great crisis. We remain in a period of incredible global uncertainty and instability. We have, look around the world right now, we have this major problem in the Chinese economy, slowdown, problems in their stock market. We've seen the crisis in Europe once again all summer long. Obviously, we've had the fall in oil and commodity prices, which has impacted the Canadian economy. But look, I would point out what the big picture is this. Even with these downgrades, and these downgrades are for all economies around the world, reality is that just about everybody projects that the Canadian economy will, in the years to come, be at or near the top of the G7. And serious challenges, but we believe, and I think the bank believes, that the oil price shocks should be transitory on the Canadian economy.
And that means that from a policy perspective, you don't need to worry too much about it?
No, I wouldn't say we are worried about it. As I just said, we should be concerned about it. What I would suggest, what it means, though, is that we are on the right track, which is to make sure we have good fiscal discipline, we keep our budget balanced, we keep our taxes low, and we make the critical investments that we're making for the longer term in innovation, in infrastructure, in training, and in trade. Make sure we have the things that will keep the Canadian economy at or near the top of the developed world in the years to come. But we absolutely need to be focused on the economy and take these challenges very seriously.
Is there any scenario where moving away from your balanced budget plan, running deficits, is a desirable scenario?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate on a whole bunch of different scenarios, especially catastrophic ones. But I would say this: it's really this simple. It doesn't, in our judgment, make sense to plunge our country back into deficit if the economy is actually growing. And notwithstanding the mild contraction of the first 2 quarters, we're going to have overall net growth this year. Doesn't make sense to go back into deficit. We know what the pattern is once you go into deficit. There's always a reason to expand the deficit and never get back into balance. We've come a long way to make sure that our economy, that our budget is in balance, that we've done so with low tax rates and preserving our core services, and we don't want to jeopardize those things which are key for growth in the longer term. Now, obviously, if this government has shown in the past, if circumstances change dramatically, the government would change its position, but we're not going to start running deficits when we actually are going to have net growth.
So as long as there's positive growth in Canada, this is the
I don't see any reason why we would start going back into deficit with positive growth. What I would point out is this, though, Theo, and I think it's important. This does not mean, for instance, this year that the government is not, through fiscal policy, supporting growth in the Canadian economy. As the Bank of Canada has noted, and I point out 2 very important things we've done. First of all, the big tax breaks and benefits for Canadian families are flowing into the economy. That is a major support to households. And also the federal infrastructure program I announced last fall is injecting significant amount of cash throughout the country into the Canadian economy. So we have an accommodative support of fiscal policy right now without having to go into deficit.
Monetary policy, the Canadian government has relied on monetary policy to lift the economy as well. That's helped, that's fueled essentially consumer debt and housing as well in Canada. Is that a concern? Are you concerned about a housing bubble in Canada?
Well, we are concerned about, we've expressed concerns in the past about consumer debt. First of all, let me just say as the broad framework that we are very supportive of the Bank of Canada, its monetary policy. It's independent, but we have confidence in the bank. Look, I think there's 2 reasons we have had a growth in consumer debt in this country. One has been that interest rates have been very low, no doubt about it. But the other is that Canadian consumers have been very confident. You know, unlike most developed countries, we have seen middle-class incomes growing quite consistently in this country. And for large parts of the economy, people have recognized very good long-term growth prospects. So we think a lot of that consumer spending and borrowing is actually confidence in the Canadian economy. People have confidence in their ability to afford larger houses in the future. But obviously, for those who are overextended, we've urged some caution.
So you're not worried about household debt then? This is something that is reflecting strength.
I think there are households who should worry. Mm-hmm. I think broadly speaking, we have confidence in the sector. The lenders, we have the most stable banking system in the world according to the World Economic Forum and other analysts. The balance sheets of the lenders are good. For the most part, the balance sheets of the borrowers are good. There may be some element of those borrowers who have overextended, and they have to watch what they're doing. But we don't believe there's any data suggests any kind of impending crisis there.
A lot of analysts have puzzled over the phenomenon of how the low loonie hasn't really helped exporters and manufacturers. There seems to be a disconnect there. Is that something that you've looked at?
Well, look, it's maybe slower than people would have hoped, but these things don't happen overnight. I mean, the Bank of Canada will tell you that the lag times on dollar and monetary policy changes are still significant. They're not instantaneous. All I can tell you is this: we've worked strongly with our exporters, with the Canadian Association of Exporters and Manufacturers, to do the things that they believe we need to do to keep them competitive in terms of investments in innovation and certain tax measures. And they're very confident that industry has made a long-term transition. So, we're seeing some growth there, and I'm confident we'll see more as we go forward.
Trade agreements have also been a big component of your administration.
Huge component, yeah.
We're in the middle of negotiations as we speak
right.
in Hawaii for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. How's that going? Should we be expecting a deal anytime soon?
Well, I think, look, I'm not going to speculate on when it will be concluded. I can tell you that discussions are well advanced. Our objective as a government is to make sure this country is part of an ambitious Asia-Pacific international trade network. Obviously, we're going to fight for all the various interests of our industries, including supply management. These industries have different interests, and we try and support them all. But we want to make sure we're part of that. One of the things this government has done, one of the things I'm most proud of, is the way we have transformed the global trade network that this country has access to. When we came to office, trade agreements with only 5 countries in the world, concluded largely by the previous Conservative government a generation ago. We now have trade agreements concluded, I think it's with 44 countries at last count, all of Europe, big chunk of the Americas. Through South Korea, we have our first toehold in the Asia-Pacific region, a couple of other agreements in the Middle East. So this is a big transformation, a big opportunity for the Canadian economy. But given that we are a trading nation, and given the global economy is the way of the future, we cannot be left out of this kind of trade arrangement.
Should dairy farmers be concerned?
The government is at the table making sure it protects the interests as best we can of every Canadian industry. We have made commitments to sustain our supply management system, and we are working to achieve that.
Let's turn to energy for a moment. Yesterday, Senator John Hoeven spoke in the Senate and made a revelation, really, that he's being told that President Obama will reject the Keystone Pipeline in August when Congress is in recess. What are you hearing?
Well, look, that's clearly possible. The fact the decision has not been rendered for so long, even after all the objective analyses said that the project is better from economic standpoint, an energy standpoint, and even an environmental standpoint, certainly preferable to rail. Even after all those things, a decision hasn't been rendered. Look, I think the politics, and after, by the way, the American people have been clear on both sides of the political divide that they support the project. I think there's very peculiar politics of this particular administration. I believe that whether this project goes ahead or not on this administration, it will ultimately go ahead under a subsequent administration.
Are you planning to call the President to ask about this?
The President and I have spoken about this matter quite regularly. I've raised I've raised the issue. He knows my viewpoint, and I know his thinking on the matter as well.
Recently, are you anticipating?
We've talked about this recently.
Are you anticipating a rejection during the?
I'm not going to speculate right now. But as they say, the fact is, notwithstanding the facts, a positive decision has not been rendered for a very long time, and that's obviously not a hopeful sign.
Do you think it would be appropriate to reject something like such an important project for Canada in the middle of an election campaign?
I'm not going to speculate on that timing and those kinds of matters. Look, I think we have to accept something. We always get upset when Americans are perceived to be meddling in our affairs. This is ultimately an American decision. I've been very clear about what I think is in the best interest, not just of Canada, but in the best interest of North America. And as I say, I think the studies of the U.S. government itself confirm everything the government of Canada has been saying and everything the American people have been saying to the administration. But the administration ultimately has the right to make their own decision.
But energy infrastructure has been a big part of your priority, and it's something that you, from the get-go of the current mandate, you made a national priority, I think is what the word that you used, or the words that you used. 4 years later, we're not that much closer to a major pipeline being built. What went wrong?
Well, there's still lots of projects in the works that are going through various phases of the regulatory process and development process. Look, there's been growth in other sectors of the energy industry. We now have uranium, coal. We're selling vast amounts of energy to Asia in ways we never did. So there's been growth. In terms of pipeline capacity, there's lots of capacity, especially with the current situation, for several years to come. As I say, I think this will eventually be resolved both in the United States and in Canada.
We spoke of elections just a moment ago. Elections are around the corner. Are you anticipating an early rig drop, or are you anticipating?
I never, I tell you, Theo, I tell journalists all the time, I don't speculate, and I particularly don't speculate on my own actions. Obviously, look, there's an important decision coming up for Canadians October 19th. We've said some time ago, I think it was years ago, that would be the election date. That will be the election date. And the choice is really very clear. It's, are we going to stay on the path that has assured to now, and according to all projections will continue to assure, that this country leads the developed world in terms of job growth, income growth, economic growth, or will we get into the kind of high debt, reckless spending, high tax policies that are jeopardizing the economies of so much of the world? That's going to be the big and clear choice for Canadians.
In the 2011 election, you talked about the coalition, the risky coalition that the opposition would be, I think, rushing with lightning speed is how you put it. Is that still a concern?
Look, I would just say that I think all of the opposition parties represent a different approach from the government. They represent an approach of reckless spending, spiraling deficits, and high taxation that is a policy that is failing visibly in countries all around the world. And we do not want to go down that route. We want to continue to have a firm fiscal foundation here of balanced budgets, low taxes, and we want to be able to make investments in the things that will drive growth in this country into the future: infrastructure, innovation, training, and trade. That's what we're doing. I think it's I think all objective, credible observers think that Canada is broadly on the right track in terms of economic policy, and I'm confident that when Canadians look at that option, they will reach the same conclusion.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thanks for having me.